A meaningless world engenders fear. 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 A meaningless world engenders
Lesson 13 in A Course in Miracles. A meaningless world engenders fear. Today's idea is really another form of the preceding one, except that it is more specific as to the emotion aroused. Actually, a meaningless world is impossible. Nothing without meaning exists. However, it does not follow that you will not think you perceive something that has no meaning. On the contrary, you will be particularly likely to think you do perceive it. Recognition of meaninglessness arouses intense anxiety in all the separated ones. It represents a situation in which God and the ego challenge each other as to whose meaning is to be written in the empty space that meaninglessness provides. The ego rushes in frenetically to establish its own idea there, fearful that the void may otherwise be used to demonstrate its own impotence and unreality. And on this alone it is correct. It is essential, therefore, that you learn to recognize the meaningless and accept it without fear. If you are faithful, it is certain that you will endow the world with attributes that it does not have, and crowd it with images that do not exist. To the ego, illusions are safety devices, as they must also be to you who equate yourself with the ego. The exercises for today, which should be done about 3 or 4 times, for not more than a minute or so at most each time, are to be practiced in a somewhat different way from the preceding ones. With eyes closed, repeat today's idea to yourself. Then open your eyes and look about you slowly, saying, I am looking at a meaningless world. Repeat this statement to yourself as you look about. Then close your eyes and conclude with, a meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in competition with God. You may find it difficult to avoid resistance in one form or another to this concluding statement. Whatever form such resistance may take, remind yourself that you are really afraid of such a thought because of the vengeance of the enemy. You are not expected to believe the statement at this point, and will probably dismiss it as preposterous. Note carefully, however, any signs of overt or covert fear which it may arouse. This is our first attempt at stating an explicit cause and effect relationship of a kind which you are very inexperienced in recognizing. Do not dwell on the concluding statement, and try not to even think of it except during the practice periods. That will suffice at present.
A meaningless world engenders fear. 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 A meaningless world engenders
And now for the reflection on Lesson 13. It seems that Jesus has dropped a bomb with the single statement, "A meaningless world engenders fear because I think I am in competition with God." And then he goes on to use words like vengeance and enemy, and says that you're not expected to believe the statement at this point, and that you'll probably dismiss it as preposterous. And yet, it's clearly important at the very beginning of the course for us to consider the possibility that it's true, that we are the ones who set up a world that for a moment seemed to compete with the world that was created for us by God, the real world. And yet, our world is filled with the images of death and separation, and yet still we cling to it. And that's why at the very beginning of the course, Jesus is doing such a masterful job of letting us let go piece by piece of the world that we thought we created so that we can begin to realize what we did and return to the real world that was created for us by God, the eternal world where all of these symbols of death disappear on their own. So consider that possibility, consider that statement as a statement of fact, even at the beginning here, because it prepares us for what is to come.